Hello everyone, this is part 6 of What If Naruto was reincarnated as Donquixote Doflamingo, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more. Comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
This sand was different. Doflamingo realized this as soon as his fret saw contacted Gaara's sand arm. It was even denser than before and, looking at it now, seemed more organic. Just what was Gaara becoming? Well, it didn't matter, he just had to stop him. Kicking off the air, Doflamingo gained some distance before Gaara could retaliate, launching several of his strings at the redhead. Gaara brought up his arm, blocking the strings with it. Gaara leaped, hurtling toward him with impressive speed, a sand arm reared back. The arm struck, Doflamingo bring up his leg to block it with his shin, armament haki being used to take in the blow. He saw his leg being absorbed into the arm, and lashed out with a kick at Gaara's face, sending him back and freeing himself. Gaara landed on his back, getting up a moment later, changed. One of his eyes had changed color, now a dark gold, the right side of his face looking monstrous. Ha 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 ha. What's wrong, Naruto? Are you scared? Are you scared that my existence is stronger than yours? His voice had changed slightly too, it seemed feral and he was drooling now, the shape of his mouth having changed. Doflamingo stared at him wondering what he meant, what Gaara was trying to prove. And what do you mean by that, Gaara? How is this proving your existence? He asked honestly curious. Gaara began to chuckle lightly before exploding into manic laughter. How? It's simple, I live for only myself, I care only for myself and I love only myself. But, how does someone who cares only for themselves have a purpose in this world? That answer is simple as well. Through the death of through the killing of others is where I prove that I exist. As long as there are people to kill in this world, I will never disappear. Now, Naruto, make me feel alive. A torrent of sand erupted from the ground, flying into the air. It became a massive wave that hurtled toward him. Doflamingo pointed a palm at the wave while jumping toward it. Overheat. The beam of molten string was wider this time, carving a small enough hole through the wave for Doflamingo to jump through. He kicked the air, increasing his speed and appearing above of Gaara. His leg thundered down, landing a powerful drop kick on Gaara's head. Gaara looked dazed for a moment, not expecting the blow. He jumped back, looking Gaara in the eye. And what if I told you I had a better way? A way to make sure that you're never forgotten. Would you take my offer, Gaara of the desert? He shook his head, his concentration returning and looked back at Doflamingo, that wild look still in his eyes. Standing this close, he could see the sand spreading, he was getting bigger. The strange thing was, his haki couldn't sense him doing it, as if he were doing it unconsciously. A better way. And what would that be? What could possibly make me stronger other than the killing of others? Since I began living like this, no one could touch me. No more assassins, no more threats, no more pain. If you think your way can beat that, then prove it. Defeat me right here, if you can. The sand behind him was back, Doflamingo jumping into the air to avoid it coiling around him. He gathered his strings, throwing them further into the air while jumping off the air, avoiding the ocean of sand chasing him. Fulbright. The strings he threw rocketed down, piercing Gaara's arms and holding him in place. Moving quickly, he made his way back toward Gaara, increasing his speed until his surroundings become a blur. He was moving just above the ground, rapidly approaching Gaara. He leaned back, adjusting himself and putting his feet in front of him. Covering his feet in haki, he slammed both of his feet into Gaara's chest. He watched as the air escaped Gaara's lungs, his eyes rolling into the back of his head at the blow. He was sent flying backward, slamming into the stadium wall. The wall had barely held up, splintering almost instantly at Gaara's impact. The sand behind him had fallen for a moment, and Doflamingo stopped as well, looking to see what had happened to Gaara. A massive dust cloud had been released, hiding him from view, but his haki had seen it coming. An appendage of sand came from the cloud of dust, threatening to slam into him. He jumped to the side, dodging it and watching it retract. It wasn't an arm, it seemed almost like a tendril, with sand scales running along it. The dust cleared, revealing Gaara's form. He'd gotten bigger again, the only thing normal about him was his legs, and he had grown a very large tail. Looking away from Gaara, he took a look around. There was fighting in the stands, Sound and Sand Ninja fighting against the Leaf. Looking toward the old man, he saw him being carried on top of the roof. He was worried about the old man, but he had a fight to win. Lee would protect Temari and everyone else was more than capable of protecting themselves. He looked over at Gaara, his body tensing as it got ready to fight. Gaara began to laugh manically. Ha ha ha. Yes, you will be the one. With your death, my existence will be absolute. Doflamingo was confused at what his haki was telling him. Gaara began to form a hand seal. He was expecting another wave of sand or sand shuriken. Instead, his haki told him Gaara was going to take a nap. Sleeping possum jutsu. Hiruzen stood in front of Orochimaru, watching calmly as the purple barrier formed around them, separating them from any outside interference. He looked at his former student, rage and shame running through him. Rage at the man that would dare harm his village. Shame at the fact that he could have stopped this years ago. He tore off his Hokage robes, revealing his shinobi armor that hid underneath, preparing for another fight for his life. My, getting so serious already. Do you really hate me that much, Sarutobi-sensei? He ignored his former student, quickly going through hand seals. The floor underneath Orochimaru quickly turned to mud, wrapping around him and pulling him down. It dragged him down the roof as a mud dragon's head emerged from ground, opening his maw and firing earth projectiles at Orochimaru. Hiruzen spat a stream of fire from his mouth, igniting the projectiles launched by the dragon and setting him ablaze. They crashed into Orochimaru, setting him on fire as the mud buried him. When it cleared, Orochimaru had disappeared, but Hiruzen knew it wasn't over. He didn't waste any time, there was an enemy Jinchuriki in the village, already starting to transform and Naruto was fighting them. He had to help the boy, and quickly. He had to kill Orochimaru. He slammed his palm onto the ground, summoning Enma while Orochimaru continued to hide. The Great Monkey King appeared in all his glory, immediately looking for the threat he was summoned to face. What's going on, Sarutobi? Why have you summoned me? Hiruzen watched as Orochimaru finally appeared, rising from the ground with a confident smile on his face. Enma saw Orochimaru, immediately understanding and transforming into the adamantine staff. Hiruzen grabbed Enma's staff form out of the air, getting into his stance as he prepared for Orochimaru's counter-attack. Orochimaru's lower body suddenly changed, resembling a snake as he quickly rushed toward him. His former student opened his mouth, revealing a sword that quickly extended, intending to impale him. Hiruzen dodged the blade, not bothering to try and block the Kusanagi sword. Also known as the grass-cutting sword, it's said to be able to cut through anything as if it were a blade of grass. While Enma's staff form could resist it, it still was able to harm his partner. Hiruzen rushed forward, thrusting his staff at Orochimaru's stomach, striking him directly. Jumping into the air, he willed Enma's form to extend, driving Orochimaru into the ground. He was dragged for several meters before he reeled Enma back in, already performing hand seals while throwing Enma into the air, to try and kill him. Orochimaru had impressive healing abilities after all his modifications. To defeat him, he would have to destroy his body entirely, or fight him until he ran out of chakra. At his age, fighting for that long was no longer a valid option. Fire style. Dragon Flame Bomb. Fire erupted from his mouth, rushing toward Orochimaru. The flames were white hot, melting the tiles that they traveled above. Even Orochimaru wouldn't survive this attack if it struck. Earth style. Mud Wall. A wall of earth rose to defend against his attack. His flames met the wall, the impact and pressure behind the flames causing it to crack and crumble. It only lasted for a few seconds before the wall came down, the fire bursting through it. Hiruzen already knew that Orochimaru wasn't behind it anymore, turning to his left and throwing multiple wind-infused shuriken as Orochimaru rose from the ground. Ninja Art. Multi-Shadow Shuriken Jutsu. The few shuriken quickly became a storm of steel, hurtling toward Orochimaru. The snake began several hand seals, then slammed his palms onto the ground. Summoning Jutsu. Reanimation. Coffins began to rise, two of them forming a protective wall in front of him and blocking the shuriken. Acting quickly, he went through his hand seals, trying to stop the summoning. Lightning style. False darkness. A spear of lightning shot from his mouth, slowly cutting through one of the coffins. He saw a third coffin begin to rise but he couldn't stop now, finally cutting through one of them. Hiruzen stopped the technique, taking a small breath as he watched the results of Orochimaru's technique. He had stopped the first coffin and the third seemed to have failed, simply returning to the earth. The last coffin opened, revealing his teacher and predecessor, Tobirama Senju. His former sensei walked out, his face impassive, his skin looking dull and lifeless with small cracks appearing up and down his frame. He spoke, and the voice brought back memories. Is that you, little Saru? You've gotten old. He couldn't help but sweat drop at his bluntness but raised his guard. Orochimaru planted a sealing formula into the dead cage's head, completing the technique. Tobirama straightened slightly, the result of the seal taking hold. He tensed, preparing to fight two cage-level enemies at the same time. His chakra flared, the sheer power of his chakra creating cracks in the tile below him. The two rushed toward him, Hiruzen spinning his staff, ready to meet them. Temari was staring at his brother, looking at the disbelief and shock on his face. She told him her plan, the fact that she had betrayed the Sand Village to protect her brothers, to give them a place that didn't live under Ra's foolish rule. She was tired of it, the ultimate weapons, the desperation that every day would bring, wondering if this is the day the sand would shrivel and die. She refused to live like that, to stay in the place that had turned Gaara into a heartless killing machine, the place that killed her mother just so they could have the weapon. She told Kankuro exactly that. His reaction was not what she had hoped. What the hell are you talking about? Temari flinched at his words, taking a breath as she tried to ignore the sound of battle around her. You know what I'm talking about, Kankuro. We can't stay in the sand, I refuse to. I can't accept father's action anymore. I'm taking Gaara and we're staying in the leaf. Now, are you going to come with us? She hardened her heart, preparing to face off against her brother but praying that he said yes. Kankuro stared at her for a moment, his look of shock still there before it slowly disappeared, becoming one of determination instead. He spoke, she didn't like what she heard. Temari, for the crime of deserting and betraying the Kankuro, please. The Sand Village, you are hereby considered a missing nin, a traitor to the sand. Kankuro swung Crow from behind him, revealing his prized puppet, his chakra strings emerging from his fingertips as they connected to the dangerous construct. Temari blinked away tears, pulling out her fan and preparing herself. You disappoint me, Temari. That wasn't Kankuro. Looking behind her, she saw Baki, her now former sensei thrusting a kunai toward her neck. Surprised, she was unable to dodge, watching in slow motion as the blade made its way toward her neck. Watching as a hand clasped around Baki's wrist, stopping him dead in his tracks. Turning slightly, she saw Lee was there, a cold expression on his face as he held Baki back. Lee moved, throwing Baki's arm and him with it away from the two of them. They stood there, back to back. Temari facing Kankuro and Lee against her sensei. She looked behind her, addressing Lee. You gonna be alright against him? He is a Jonin. Lee simply nodded. Yes, he won't be a problem. I trust you can hold your own against your brother. She nodded back. Yeah. Lee took a step forward, reaching into his trench cloak and pulling out, was that a stick of bamboo? Then we had best begin. Temari nodded as she turned back toward Kankuro. She looked around. They were still in the stands and, while quite spacious, they would make things rather cramped. They both had the advantage here. She would have less room to avoid Crow and he would have less room to avoid her fan's winds. Crow moved first, flying toward her with the blades at its wrist extended. She blocked Crow's attack, spinning her fan to throw the puppet against the wall and ran toward Kankuro. She swung her fan, launching her blades of wind. Wind style, wind scythe jutsu. The blast of air said toward him, Kankuro immediately jumping over the rail to dodge the attack. She saw him launch his chakra strings, using them as a grappling hook to swing over to the other side of her and climb back up. Crow was moving the entire time, now close to her and forcing her to dodge its attacks. Suddenly, its arms detached, now flying in the air around her. They surrounded her, pushing forward and preparing to impale her from all sides. She swung her fan behind her, not wanting to attack Kankuro in case she interrupts Lee and Baki's fight. The wind threw the arms back as she threw kunai at the strings attached to the remaining two arms. The chakra strings were severed, and the arms began to fall. Grabbing one of them, she launched it at Kankuro as she ran toward him. Kankuro dodged the arm, grabbing it with a chakra string as it went past him and spinning, using the momentum of her throw to launch it back toward her. She dodged to the left, avoiding it as she sent a punch to Kankuro's face. He blocked it, but she wasn't done. A sharp knee impacted his stomach, forcing the air from his lungs and dazzling him for a moment. She folded her fan back up, jumping back as she golf swung the metal object. It crashed into his face, sending him back, unconscious. She stared down at him, saddened that she had to do this. She took a moment to regain her breath, before Kankuro disappeared in a puff of smoke, revealing Crow. A substitution. She turned around, Kankuro already behind her and swinging one of Crow's arms. She jumped back, raising her arms to defend herself. She could feel the blade digging into her arms, sending the poison into her veins. She hissed at both the pain and the stupid mistake. She stretched out her fan, trying to settle the panic rising within her. Kankuro spoke, his breath ragged at their small exchange. It's over, Temari. If you want the cure to that poison, then you had better give up. That's the only way you're getting through this. Temari stood there, looking at the wound on her arm. Kankuro had access to some of the best poisons the Sand had access to, being both a prodigal puppeteer and the son of the Kazekage. She knew this poison. It was slow acting, and the symptoms could seemingly disappear for a length of time after taking an antidote. It could take months for the poison to take effect, but it was almost impossible to simply find a cure for it for anyone but the one who made it. Each of Crow's blades had a different poison on them, but she knew that was the one he had used. She didn't doubt it for a moment. She looked at him, seeing the pleading look in his eyes. She looked down at Gaara, seeing his maddened look and crazed expression. She pictured the small redhead that used to smile up at her, gentle and kind. She made her choice. She swung her fan, releasing the razor-sharp winds once again. Kakashi fist slammed into the Sound Ninja's face, the force twisting their head and snapping their neck. He grabbed the corpse, throwing it to the side at the Sound Ninja that had leapt toward him. They collided, Kakashi meeting the downed ninja and slitting their throat with a kunai. He threw the kunai behind him, infusing it with lightning chakra and stabbing the Sand Jonin that had attempted to sneak up on him in the chest, obliterating his heart. He turned around, quickly joining Guy and the other rookie 12 that had gathered to his position. The only ones missing were Lee, Sasuke and Neji. Shikamaru had spotted him in the stands and made his way toward him, dragging Sakura with him. When he reached them, Sakura spoke. What should we do now, Kakashi-sensei? He looked at her, then at the rest of the rookies. They weren't ready for this. They were talented, yes, but there was an army of enemy Chunin and Jonin in the village. They could be killed at any moment. I want you guys to head to the Hokage Monument and to the shelters. You guys aren't ready for this level of combat yet. Guy will take you there while I search for Lee, Sasuke and Neji. Guy nodded at his suggestion, turning around and blowing a hole in the nearby wall. Now, get going. Kakashi leaped away, not waiting to hear their responses. He considered helping Naruto, but he seemed to be holding his own against Gaara for now. The others were his main concern. Neji was most likely still injured from his fight, and Sasuke had used the Chidori as well, taking almost half his chakra. He headed toward the stands, their last known position. As he got there, he saw a battle going on. Temari, the spy that the Hokage had informed him of when he and Sasuke returned, seemed to have already been found out, fighting the puppet user. Lee was there too, fighting against that Jonin, Baki. Kakashi. Someone whispered his name. Looking around, he saw Sasuke and Neji, hiding in the stairs leading to the arena. There were a couple of unconscious enemy ninja as well. They looked exhausted, the fight no doubt being difficult for the both. Sasuke having to protect Neji as he fought on one good leg. He joined them, hiding in the staircase and looking out for any approaching enemies. Are you guys good to travel? I would like to get you to the shelters. They both shook their heads. He wasn't surprised, but he didn't like the situation either. All right, I'm going to help Lee, you guys stay here and make sure no one finds you. Kakashi stepped out, analyzing Lee's fight with Baki. The boy was using a stick of bamboo as a makeshift staff, expertly using it to attack the Sand Jonin. The boy was fast, expertly dodging Baki's attack, but there was something strange. Lee was moving further than necessary to dodge the attack, and Baki wasn't so much as striking at him, but slashing something at him, but there was nothing in his hand. He pulled up his headband, revealing his Sharingan. Now he could see it, a sword of wind held in Baki's hand. This made things difficult. The wind blade was a very difficult technique to perform but was very dangerous. It was as sharp as any blade and as light as air, seeing it was made from it. The most dangerous part of the technique was the difficulty to block it. Trying to block it with another sword was impossible, it would just go around the sword and continue its path. There was a weakness there as well though, the user was unable to block attacks with the blade. Lee was dodging the blade well though. The only thing confusing Kakashi was how the boy was dodging it so well. The blade was near invisible, giving anyone without the ability to see chakra a very difficult time. Well, it didn't matter right now, he had to get it in there and help the genin. Kakashi rushed in, the crackling of lightning filling the stands. Baki ducked under the bamboo sword, swinging his own at the boy, Lee, who simply stepped to the side, dodging the attack. He was becoming swiftly irritated, first Temari's betrayal and now this genin going toe-to-toe with him. He was fast, moving with experience and intent, not showing the hesitation or nervousness most genin would display at the thought of facing a jonin. Baki lashed out with a kick, aimed toward the kid's stomach. To his surprise, he caught his foot, then threw him toward the wall to his side. He adjusted quickly, planting his feet on the wall and bending his knees to absorb the impact. He launched off the wall, feeling the concrete slightly give as he rushed back to meet Lee. He swung his sword, just barely missing his cheek. He sent a burst of wind from his palm, moving him to the side in midair to avoid Lee's high kick at his torso. He landed on the ground, eyeing his opponent. This wasn't normal, the kid was too strong and quick to be a normal genin. This level of strength would put him almost at jonin level, the only thing holding him back being the lack of demonstrated ninjutsu. His eye narrowed, trying to think of a solution. He couldn't use ninjutsu, risk hurting Kankuro behind him. Lee was dodging his wind blade with ease and he was dodging the boy's taijutsu. They were at a stalemate. He looked to the side, seeing a couple sand shinobi approach from the arena, reinforcements. He recognized them, Chunin level and recently promoted as well. They rushed at Lee, not being subtle in the slightest. He was about to reprimand them to go help Kankuro but he was too late, they were already too close. The first shinobi landed near Lee, a fist already flying. Lee ducked under the attack, his bamboo swung low. Baki watched as the seemingly harmless stick struck at the shinobi's leg, bending it backwards as the sand ninja's face morphed into an expression of agony. Lee rose from his crouch, throwing his stick into the air and grabbed the ninja, pulling a kunai from the sand ninja's pouch with his other hand. He threw the ninja into the other behind him, making them collide in midair. He threw the kunai, watching as a small shockwave seemed to form from the force of his arm, catching the bamboo that fell from the air. The kunai tore through both ninja, piercing their hearts. Baki barely saw the kunai as it cut through the air. Yes, definitely not normal. His physical strength was unbelievable, the kind one would expect from that jonin, might guy or even the Reikage, people who had honed their physical strength all their life, not from a mere genin. Could it be? Was this child the Leaf's Jinchuriki? It was possible that the fox gave its host lots of physical strength, its own being legendary for being capable of crushing mountains and causing tsunamis with a flick of its tail. This wasn't good, he needed backup if he was dealing with a Jinchuriki, but he couldn't leave Kankuro alone. He had to hope that Kankuro could defeat Temari soon and help him deal with Lee. They clashed again, both of them too fast and too skilled to be taken down by the other. Bamboo and blades of wind were launched but none met their mark. Baki heard something behind him, the crackling of lighting and it was closing in fast. He disengaged, jumping to the side and turning to see the new threat. It was Kakashi Hatake, his famous lightning blade in hand and heading straight for him. He was moving fast, his steps causing the concrete below him to crack and splinter due to the force of his steps. The lightning blade extended and Baki met it with his own wind blade. The two clashed, Baki feeling the lightning from Kakashi's hand running through his body, slightly winning out despite the elemental advantage. There was a small explosion after the jutsu clashed, sending Baki flying over the railing, and out of the stands. He grabbed the railing, hanging over the edge and hearing a voice cry out. Looking over, he saw Kankuro flying out of the stands as well, winds cutting into him. He jumped off of the wall, catching Kankuro in midair and landing in the arena. Can you stand? Baki asked, not wasting any time as he tried to get Kankuro back on his feet. Kankuro nodded, standing on slightly wobbly legs. His puppet was gone, probably destroyed by Temari. Why yeah, I'm fine sensei. Baki nodded quickly. Good. We need to get out of here and retreat, meet up with some of our shinobi. Kankuro spun toward him, bewildered. But Baki-sensei, what about Temari? Baki glared at his student. It doesn't matter right now, Kankuro. What matters most is our survival and ensuring the sand wins this fight. We can't do that if we're dead. He watched as Kankuro nodded hesitantly. The two quickly left the stadium, keeping an eye on the ones they fought. They all looked up toward him but made no movement to follow. After that fight, he wasn't very confident in them winning this battle. Sasuke looked out from the stairs, seeing the sand ninja that Kakashi and Lee fought run away. He went back and grabbed Neji, lifting him from the wall that he was sitting against. Thanks, Sasuke, but I should be okay to stand on my own. Sasuke nodded, letting him go and turning around, watching as Kakashi came from around the corner and appearing at the top of the stairs. You two okay? Sasuke and Neji nodded, with Sasuke asking just what was going on. What's happening out there? Kakashi looked at him for a moment before gesturing to his side, Temari and Lee appearing as well. They walked down the stairs and joined them. Kakashi explained the situation. It seems that the Sand Village has allied with the Hidden Sound. They're both trying to destroy the Hidden Leaf, using the Chunin exams as a way to infiltrate us. Sasuke gestured over to Temari, wondering about her part in all of this. Kakashi didn't need words to understand what she was asking. Temari here was our informant, letting us know about the attack ahead of time. The evacuation of the Leaf had started as soon as the Chunin exams began. After they're done, the counterattack will commence. You guys aren't ready for this kind of fight, therefore, I want you to head to the Hokage Monument and enter the shelters. Lee, you'll guide him there and meet Guy, he went ahead with the rest of your class. Any questions? Sasuke was a bit peeved at being put on the sidelines, but if Lee was being sent there too then he was in no position to argue. Curious, he asked where Naruto was, Kakashi looking at him for a moment before answering. He's still fighting Gaara. Now, get going you guys. They all nodded, Sasuke once again wrapping Neji's arm around his shoulder to help him travel, Lee guiding the way. They exited the stands, Sasuke looking at Naruto for a moment. He stood in front of that monster, Gaara, who had transformed into some tailed sand demon. His stance was as confident as ever, never faltering even in the presence of something like that. He kept going, following Lee's lead but couldn't help but think of Naruto's abilities. He was so strong, and now he knew that he wasn't the only one either. He couldn't imagine facing down a beast like Gaara, yet Naruto didn't hesitate to do just that. They were monsters that were on an entirely different level. Monsters that were on the same level as Itachi. Until he joined them, he didn't think he was ever going to catch up to his brother. Doflamingo watched as Gaara suddenly slumped forward, his body going slack as he immediately went to sleep. He was confused, wondering what was going on until it started. Chakra seemed to permeate the air, Gaara's body being consumed by the sand and growing exponentially. He couldn't see where the sand was coming from, it was like it was being formed from thin air. He was forced to jump back further and further, eventually deciding to abandon the ground entirely, attaching his strings to the clouds and seemingly standing in midair. Gaara was enormous now, resembling some kind of raccoon and taking up almost the entire stadium. Gaara's real body was on the construct's forehead, only his upper body visible. Doflamingo continued to watch, wondering what he was planning. He was large now, yes, but what good was that if he was asleep? Suddenly, the construct's eyes seemed to glow, becoming a bright gold instead of dark dull. With it, a voice thundered from its mouth. Yeah, I'm back baby. Doflamingo stared, even more confused. That was not Gaara's voice, it sounded nothing like him and Gaara was still asleep. Was it some kind of split personality? Or was there more to that sand spirit stuff Temari had told him about? Then, Doflamingo heard a familiar voice coming from behind him. Naruto. He turned around, the surroundings changing into the familiar sewer where the fox lived. Now he was slightly peeved. First the strange happenings with Gaara and now the fox wanted to speak with him after ignoring him for the entire month. Hey, what did you want, Fox? The beast snorted at him, annoyed at the nickname. That boy you're fighting, I'm telling you that he's like you. Doflamingo raised an eyebrow, wondering what exactly he meant. Did he mean a reincarnation? It would certainly explain his strength but didn't make much sense. Unless. So, there really are more of you out there. That sand spirit is a tailed beast. He has someone sealed in him too then. The fox stared at him, seemingly slightly shocked at his words but the look faded quickly. Yes, Within that boy is my brother, Shukaku, the one-tailed raccoon. He isn't very smart, but his ability to control sand makes him dangerous in the desert. Dofi raised an eyebrow. So, Gaara gets to control sand, but what do I get from you? A headache. Hey hey hey. The fox surprised him, not rising at the jab and simply looking at him with determination. He seemed to be hesitating, something Dofi had never seen from the fox. Tell me, what will you do with the boy now? He's clearly unstable, it would probably be easier to kill him if nothing else. Dofi hummed at his words, pretending to think it over, but he had already decided. Temari had asked him to help Gaara, and he clearly needed it. Gaara was another person that had suffered, his life being dictated and controlled by his father, something Dofi knew all too well. If the old man didn't kill Rasa, then Dofi would be sure to finish the job. No, he had to help Gaara, and Gaara had said that he could help him by defeating him. He grinned at the enormous fox. Hey hey hey, that'd be too easy. Nope, I'm gonna save this kid, drag him into my family by force if I have to. Besides, I always wanted a pet crocodile. He could see that the fox was confused at his words, but he ignored him, turning back to face Shukaku the sand spirit. He had a fight to win. He raised a palm targeting the creature's face, but being sure to avoid Gaara. Overheat. The strings turned part of his face to glass, causing the one-tails to cry out in anger more than anything else. That organic sand composed his entire body. He put everything he had into that one, but he barely pierced through the creature. He wouldn't be able to beat this thing, not without something heavier than what he currently had. Physical strength was useless against it, and the effects of his most powerful elemental attack was already healing, the glass slowly being replaced with sand. Then, Shukaku looked at him. Hey, that hurt, you stupid fox. Take this. Wind style, drilling air bullet. What? The ball of compressed air slammed into him. He gathered his haki, his arms and legs turning black as he tried to block the attack. He was sent flying, not expecting such a powerful attack from the beast. His back slammed into something, prompting him to cover his back in haki as well. Whatever he slammed into stopped his momentum. He dug out of what seemed to be rock and looked around. He was at the Hokage Mountain. He felt pain in his chest, causing him to cough into his hands. He looked down, seeing blood. I didn't expect him to be able to use ninjutsu, I expected more sand attacks. That attack was strong, might have killed me if I hadn't pulled up my haki. He looked at Shukaku, a plan forming in his mind as he took to the air. Shukaku only appeared after Gaara went to sleep. Most likely, only one of them can control his body at a time, and Gaara can't let him take over willingly. Gaara had to force himself into unconsciousness to let Shukaku out. If I can wake him up, then Shukaku should be forced back by Gaara's consciousness. He took to the air, making sure to stay high up and away from the village. That attack was devastating. Looking behind him, there was now a large crater in the mountain, and Dofi didn't want to find out what that could do to buildings. Still, he had to end this quickly, he was beginning to tire after using his overheat so many times. He still wasn't very efficient with it yet, not used to creating the necessary fire chakra. Wind style, drilling air bullets. Shukaku fired more of his bullets at him, Dofi quickly jumping through the air to dodge them. The bullets were large though, making it very difficult. He was in front of the raccoon now, dashing toward Gaara's body. Oh no, you don't. Sand came from atop Shukaku's head, rushing toward him. It was fast, faster than the sand Gaara had used, no doubt evidence of how powerful Shukaku really was. He created a string clone, the two separating as they approached from either side, causing the sand to split in two. Using their full strength, they both kicked off the air, a loud boom sounding off as they rocketed toward Gaara. They used their strings to pull them out of the way of the sand rising from atop Shukaku's forehead. His clone was caught, being pulled into Shukaku and being crushed by his body. Dofi kept going, a leg raised and clad in haki as it struck out at Gaara. A sand wall rose, a last-ditch effort to protect his host. His leg impacted, bending the sand but not quite breaking through. Still, his momentum hadn't stopped yet, and Dofi wasn't done. He lashed out with his other leg at extreme speed. Tempest kick. A blade of wind was produced from his kick, slicing at the sand barrier and allowing him to break through. His leg continued forward, impacting the side of Gaara's face. Rise and shine. Hey hey hey. Shukaku began to scream and yell, his form growing smaller and smaller as he was sent back into Gaara's subconscious. No. And I just got here too. Suddenly, Shukaku's form returned to ordinary sand, losing the organic look it had before. Gaara was awake, looking at him with wide eyes as he simply grinned at him. Gaara fell, riding the falling sand to make it down safely while Doffy created a staircase of string. The two made it to the ground, Gaara on his back and looking upward as Doffy stood above him. There was fear in his eyes, honest genuine fear. He began crawling away from him. Enno, stay away from me. I won't let this be the end, I won't let my existence stop here. Doffy frowned, dodging the small bits of sand that Gaara was throwing at him. He wasn't even controlling it anymore, simply using his bare hands. Doffy caught up to the boy who had stopped by now, shaking. Doffy leaned down slightly, then, extended a hand down toward the boy. Gaara looked at it for a moment, then looked up at him, confused. I don't understand, what are you doing? Doffy just looked at him, still frowning and his hand still extended as he answered his question. We had a deal, remember? Gaara looked at him with surprise, then looked at the hand once again. It was a slow thing, hesitant. Doffy thought he was going to give up before it happened. Gaara took his hand, and Doffy smiled. Hiruzen was growing weary, the fight taking its toll. Tobirama's reanimation was seemingly impossible to destroy permanently, simply reforming moments later. His old age was catching up to him, his chakra wasn't what it used to be, and he could feel his bones creak as he pushed them to their limits. Hiruzen Sarutobi had truly fallen. Still, that didn't mean he was done, not yet. He told Jiraiya to look after the village wall because he would take care of this himself and he wouldn't fail. He ducked under Tobirama's leg, dodging the kick and pulling his other leg out from under him, causing him to fall. He threw Enma behind him at Orochimaru who was approaching him, Enma transforming back in midair to tangle with the pale man. Making a hand seal, he breathed fire onto Tobirama's prone body, melting through the tiles below until the body was ashes. Tobirama was much stronger in life than this mere puppet. Orochimaru probably dulled the former Hokage's mind to avoid him from breaking his control. Whatever the reason, it worked in his favor, and he quickly got to work while Tobirama was regenerating. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A clone appeared next to him and he continued his hand signs, forming the technique his successor had used over 12 years ago. Ninja Art, Reaper Death Seal. He could feel a chill, something coiling around him and giving a slight tug. The technique had activated, and he was going to use it to end Orochimaru. His shadow clone stayed by Tobirama's body, waiting for it to regenerate while he ran toward Orochimaru and Enma. Now, Enma. Looking at him briefly, the Monkey King nodded before transforming into his staff form. Adamantine Prison. Enma cloned himself, creating dozens of staffs that connected together around Orochimaru's body, trapping him in place. Hiruzen reached his former student, placing his hands on his shoulders and began the technique. What is that, you damn fool? Orochimaru said, no doubt seeing the spirit of the Reaper behind him. Hiruzen chuckled, that is the price we're going to pay, Orochimaru. You, for all the cruel and unnecessary pain and suffering you have caused the world. And me, for not stopping you all those years ago. Together, we'll spend the rest of our days in the stomach of the death god. Orochimaru was panicking, just as he expected. For all his confidence, Orochimaru had always been afraid of the concept of death. It was his weakness, a weakness that had driven him to insanity. He felt the death god's arm reach through his stomach and enter Orochimaru's. It grasped at his very soul and began to pull. Hiruzen felt a small rush of memories, his clone succeeding in its task and sealing Tobirama. Orochimaru smiled maniacally, Hiruzen curious as Enma called out to him. Watch out, Sarutobi. He felt the sword he had sensed spear through his chest. He ignored the pain, urging the death god to keep pulling. Looking down, he could see Orochimaru's soul, being dragged out by his arms. He looked him in the eye, seeing the shocked at livid face he had adopted. Why didn't you dodge that? Hiruzen began to chuckle at the desperation. Because, there would be no point. This technique kills the user afterward, meaning my fate has already been sealed. Orochimaru roared, thrashing against both Enma's and the death god's hold, but it was no use. He felt Orochimaru's chakra begin to pour from him, desperately trying everything he could to escape. Hiruzen could feel the death god's pull weakening as he ran out of chakra, that shadow clone taken half of his remaining chakra. Usually, when a clone dispelled the remaining chakra returned to the user. In this case, it was simply eaten by the death god, leaving his chakra reserves dangerously low. He looked down, seeing the soul's arms splayed out before him. He heard an impact against the barrier. Turning, he saw someone attacking the barrier with a fire jutsu, a redhead slung around his shoulder. The boy looked angry and desperate, trying everything he could to break the purple force field. Naruto was here, watching him. He looked back at the arms before him, before looking back at Naruto. The boy stood there for a moment, completely still as their eyes met. Hiruzen smiled at him, and Naruto's frown worsened. He started screaming something but Hiruzen couldn't hear him, couldn't read his lips past the sparks and embers of the beams he fired at the barrier. He watched as Naruto began to collapse, no doubt using the last of his chakra. He turned back to Orochimaru. Orochimaru, I may not take you with me this day, but I will take the thing that you hold most dear to you. I will not be the one who takes your head, I will give my successor that honor. Orochimaru sneered at him, growling. What are you talking about, you senile old fool? Minato is dead. Hiruzen chuckled as the death god's dagger came down. I wasn't talking about Minato. The dagger struck, slicing off the arms of Orochimaru's soul. He screamed, it was a wicked and ugly thing. His arm began to turn black and purple, they were starting to die. He had done it, he had taken Orochimaru's ninjutsu from him. My arms. What have you done to my arms? He couldn't help but chuckle, even through the pain of the sealing process. He began to fall backward as his life was taken by the god of death. He could feel Orochimaru's sword rip through his chest, Orochimaru taking it within his mouth and stabbing down into his prone body. He ignored it, thinking of the blonde boy that had grieved for him moments ago. Naruto, good luck my boy. On this day, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage and god of shinobi, had passed away. He couldn't believe it. He stabbed down with all his remaining strength over and he still couldn't believe it. He had lost. His former sensei was dead, but he still lost. He looked down at the mangled body of the former Hokage, his rage increasing as he struggled to even lift his arms. All of this, the death of the Hokage, the destruction of the hidden leaf, none of it would ever be worth the loss of his ninjutsu. He swallowed the Kusanagi blade as the sound 4 dropped the barrier, appearing before him. His voice was weak, quiet, and he hated it. Take me back, he ordered. They threw his dying arms over their shoulders, carrying him back to one of his hideouts as they fled from the village. Looking around as they traveled, the invasion had not gone well. The old man must have figured it out somehow, placing defenses in advance for the invasion. He could see Jiraiya at one of the far walls, his toads fighting the large serpents his ninja had summoned. The sound and sand were slowly being pushed back. The invasion had been an utter failure. He needed to get back now. He needed to find a cure to whatever Sarutobi had done to him. Even the contact of his arms against the ones carrying him were excruciating, and the pain was no doubt going to worsen. He tried again, just in case the first time had been a fluke, channeling chakra from his torso to his arms. The chakra stopped as soon as it reached his shoulders. Hand seals relied on the connection between the chakra in the hands to the rest of his body. Without that, any jutsu requiring hand seals was out of his reach. He snarled, cursing the leaf for everything it had done to him. He thought about the old man's words for only a moment before discarding them, not even wanting to picture Sarutobi at the moment. A part of him was still absorbing the fact that he was dead, the other part was telling him that he hadn't been the one to kill him. He lost his chance to show that he had surpassed the god of shinobi. Without his ninjutsu, he had only one hope to survive in the shinobi world. The Akatsuki was still after him, still trying to kill him and get back the ring that he had stolen. He would need a new vessel now. The Sound Four weren't strong enough to deal with Naruto efficiently, he doubted they would be able to defeat and grab him quietly. That left only one option. If he couldn't heal his arms, Sasuke Uchiha would become his next vessel. He stood on top of the tiled roof, seething at the useless Anbu, just standing there as they watched their cage die in front of them. Pulling an unconscious Gaara further onto his shoulder, he used his other hand to attach strings to the Anbu, pulling them off the roof and out of his way. He looked at the old man, his battle attire on as he had his hands clamped around Orochimaru's shoulders. The two just stood there, glaring at each other. His haki was confusing him, trying to tell him what the two were doing, but he couldn't understand. It spoke, but the words made no sense, as if it were a different language entirely. He eyed the sword, the blade that was sticking out of the old man's chest, disbelief on his face. He snarled, a palm jutting forward and facing the purple barrier separating them. Come now, Naruto, you shouldn't be so upset. After all, I have many years on you in the art of warfare, the old man said, dodging a snowball. TCH. Shut up, I don't lose to anything or anybody. Now, take this. His arms began to blur as he threw snowball after snowball at the old man hiding behind his snow fort. He began to pant, getting tired at the exertion, when he felt something cold run down his back, underneath all his winter clothes. Ah! He turned around, glaring at the elder who had a large grin on his face and began to run away. Damn it, old man. Get back here. Hiruzen turned back around, berating the blonde boy, but his grin never dropping. Language, Naruto. Overheat. His fiery attack burst from his palm, impacting the barrier and sending sparks and embers flying. He watched carefully, looking for any opening. He glanced at the ones holding up the barrier, thoughts racing as he considered his options. He had two. The first, conserve his chakra and chip away at the barrier, no doubt only being held up by the 4 ninja in the corners. But, there was a problem with that, it was too slow. The old man would surely be dead by the time he got there. If he could reach him quickly, he could use his repair operation and use his strings to hold the old man together until medics arrived. So, that left option 2, try and break through it with everything he had. He eyed the charred corpse behind, gaining everything he needed to know. He couldn't risk touching this barrier, even with his haki there were no guarantees he wouldn't die immediately. He couldn't take such a risk right now, he needed to save the old man. Frustrated, he poured more chakra into his palm. Where the hell are we, old man? Hiruzen sighed at his vulgar language, before adopting a smile and placing a hand on the top of his hand. This, Naruto, is the top of the Hokage Monument. You remember what the Hokage Monument is, right? He adopted a thoughtful expression, a finger lightly tapping his chin before his face lit up in recognition. Yeah, it's the cliff with the ugly faces on it, hey hey hey. Hiruzen merely chucked at his actions as they finally reached the edge of the cliff, just above the 4th Hokage's head. They looked over the village, the two silent for a moment while they enjoyed the view. Beautiful, isn't it, Naruto? He forward, looking at the village before looking up at the Hokage, shrugging his shoulders. Just looks like a bunch of buildings to me. The Hokage laughed, nodding his head slightly. You're right, it is just a bunch of buildings. But, it's what those buildings house that is important. The people that are close to you and that you would do anything to protect. He looked over the village again, before crossing his arms and looking up and away from the old man. Still looks the same to me. The Hokage smiled gently, before ruffling the blonde's hair. Perhaps for now, but, I believe you'll find beauty in this village too, Naruto. Maybe one day, you'll find a family worth protecting in these walls. Overheat. The beam burned white hot, scalding the surface of his palm despite the attack being his own. It impacted the barrier, making it shimmer and ripple, but it would not fall. He eyed the 4 ninja, a frown on his face as he looked at them. Markings had appeared on their skin, their struggles seeming to lessen as they did so. He didn't know what those markings were, but he didn't care either. He looked at the Hokage, surprised to see their eyes meet. They stood there, looking at each other for a moment. The old man smiled. You know, Naruto, keep this up and I might have to let you take over the village. He looked up from the desk, eyeing the old man with a pout on his childish face. The hell are you going on about? This is easy, you just read the paper, stamp it if you agree and shred it if you don't. Anyone could do that, I think you're just lazy. The Hokage laughed, he watched the young boy in his lap stamp papers on his desk. They both knew that the old man had already read through them all, but they didn't say one word about it. And why the hell do you want me doing this anyways, old man? 6-year-olds aren't supposed to be doing paperwork, you know. True. I couldn't really get out of the office today and you did want to spend some time with me, so I thought what better way than to bond over the grueling task that is paperwork. He looked up at the old man, a deadpan expression on his face. What do you mean I wanted to spend more time with you? Your Anbu just came by and grabbed and then I was here, damn old man. Language, Naruto. Besides, I think you have a talent in this. After I pass, maybe you can sit here by yourself and do this. I think that would be pretty nice, don't you? He simply scowled lightly. TCH, yeah right, like you're gonna die anytime soon. You lived this long, you probably have a couple more decades in ya, hey hey hey. He set Gaara down. He could hear himself screaming and raging at the old man, but he couldn't hear his own words. They probably weren't words at all. Both palms were facing the barrier, his chakra coursing through him, burning his chakra coils as it traveled. It burst through his palms in the form of white-hot molten strings, cutting through the air as it clashed with the wall holding him back. Dual overheat. The sparks and embers that the clash brought was almost blinding. He flinched when he felt some of the remains of his strings bounce off the barrier and touch his face. Using his foot, he scooted Gaara back to make sure he wasn't hurt. The barrier just wasn't coming down. The four in the corners no longer had the marks on their skin. No, they had completely transformed, becoming something akin to demons. He wished they would drop this barrier, so he could show them what a demon truly looked like. He kept up his technique, feeling his chakra drain for the first time in his life. He began to grow tired, his overheat beginning to wane as he ran out of chakra, but he kept going. He could hear the fox talking, trying to gain his attention, but he was too focused. His attack began to lose the glow it once had, the white-hot string becoming red-hot instead. He dropped the attack soon after, falling to his knees as he watched. The old man began to fall, dying. Do you think she's gonna die? He looked over to his brother, snarling at the thought. Don't be an idiot, Rosinant. Mother isn't gonna die, all right. I won't let her. They looked at their mother, who was resting on the bed in the run-down building. It wasn't a house, or even a home. It was just a shelter. The only reason Dofi accepted it was to give their mother a place to rest. Hey Dofi. He looked over at his brother. What is Rosinant? How did this happen? His brother was crying, unable to accept the harsh reality their father had brought them. He looked at Rosinant for a moment. How did this happen? I'll tell you how this happened. He raised the gun, pointing it at the man curled in the corner, pulling the trigger. He woke up. He was sweating, his breath slightly labored as he awoke from the dream. Dofi looked around, remembering where he was. His apartment was still dark, and looking out the window it seemed to be the dead of night. He got off the mattress on the floor and stood, looking over at his bed and making sure Temari hadn't awoken. She was still sleeping peacefully. The invasion had ended the day it began, and he decided to let Temari stay with him and Gaara with Virgo until living arrangements could be made. Making his way to the kitchen, he got a glass of water, sitting at the dining table as he tried to stop the shaking of his hands. He let his haki unfold, revealing the world around him. He felt them, Temari's aura in the room next to him, Virgo in his own apartment awake now and no doubt worried for him. He felt Gaara, still awakened on a nearby rooftop. He concentrated, aiming his haki in the direction of Sakura's house. He felt her there, still asleep and perfectly safe. His hands stopped shaking. He got up, opening the window in the kitchen and stepping outside. The moon was high in the sky, the air cool and crisp. There was a slight breeze making it all the better. He jumped across a few rooftops, stopping once he made it to Gaara. He was standing at the edge of a rooftop, looking up and staring at the moon. Dofi went next to him, sitting on the edge of the roof, chuckling lightly. I hope you're not thinking of jumping. That would make all the effort of yesterday seem like quite a waste. Gaara looked down at, his face impassive as he shook his head. No, I'm just thinking about things. Dofi's smile fell as he looked at his fellow Jinchuriki. Oh, and what's on your mind, Gaara? Gaara was silent for a moment, before speaking his thoughts. Father is dead. The hidden sand will need a new Kazekage. And you wish to become the new Kazekage. The two looked at each other. Gaara looked hesitant for a moment, which surprised him. Dofi just looked on, his face only showing curiosity. The sand, many things. I have done a lot of wrong in the sand village, things I wish to make up for. But you don't want to leave me and Temari in the leaf, right? Gaara's eyes widened before they returned to normal, nodding at him. Dofi began to chuckle at the red head. You should do what you wish, Gaara. Temari and I would support you no matter your decision. After all, that's what family is for. Gaara gained a thoughtful look on his face. That makes me wonder. Makes me think about what Kankuro is doing right now. At the mention of the puppeteer, Dofi grew a sneer. TCH, he should be handing over a cure to his poison right now. Temari had told them the poison that Kankuro had given her. While negotiations for the sand's surrender haven't been settled, Doffy doubted they would end up giving him the cure. The higher-ups in the village were not concerned with a former sand ninja, daughter of the Kazekage or not. They would more likely return her to the sand than let them use her as leverage. That meant, they had to find a cure on their own. Why the hell does your brother keep such a stupid poison on him anyways? What good is a poison that only kills after a couple moths? For this exact situation, already, I'm sure there would be several things you would sacrifice to gain the cure and save Temari. Now, imagine that poison running through dozens of shinobi. A village may end up giving something important to save those ninja. Doffy scoffed at the explanation and the situation. If that's the case, then the sand will probably try and use Temari's cure as leverage. Knowing politics, the two sides will argue over and not get anything done. Gaara nodded at his words, not replying. The two sat there for a moment, looking up at the moon as they enjoyed each other's company. Gaara didn't ask why Doffy was out so late and Doffy was thankful for it. Naruto, slightly surprised, he looked over to Gaara, wondering what he wanted. What is it, Gaara? There was a small smile. Thank you. He was silent for a moment, before chuckling. He stood up, stretching as he prepared to go back inside. Hey. You know, for a former psychopathic killer, you're a sentimental guy. Good night, Gaara. Gaara simply nodded at him. Doffy made his way to the rooftop of his apartment. Stopping, he turned, facing the person watching him. You can come out now, Jiraiya. The toad sage appeared in a swirl of leaves, a serious expression on his face. The two eyed each other before Jiraiya spoke. So, I hear your friend is in a situation. Luckily for you, I have a soul. What do you want, old man? Jiraiya sighed at him, before relaxing slightly and rubbing the back of his neck. All right, listen. The leaf needs a new Hokage, and I've already settled and convinced the council on who it's going to be. Doffy stared at his godfather, wondering what this had to do with anything really. Jiraiya continued. Problem is, she's been out of the village for years. But, if we can drag her back here, not only can she be the new Hokage, she can heal your friend as well. Doffy raised an eyebrow at the news, now he was curious. Oh, and who is this woman exactly? Who can cure a poison that can apparently fool the entire medical staff of a hidden village? Jiraiya grinned at him. Tsunade, the slug princess. Doffy merely looked at him, before nodding. He had heard of Tsunade, learned about her in the academy. She was a prodigious healer and a powerful fighter, standing side by side with the likes of Jiraiya and Orochimaru. If anyone could heal Temari, it would be her. When do we leave? Jiraiya's grin fell for a moment, before answering him. Well, that depends on you really. We can leave tomorrow if you like, but that would mean missing the third's funner. That's fine. We'll leave tomorrow. Jiraiya looked at him while Doffy just stared back, not revealing a single emotion. Jiraiya nodded, his voice was quiet when he spoke. All right, I'll meet you at the Eastern Gate tomorrow morning. I'll be there at 8, just come when you're ready. The older man jumped away while Doffy returned to his apartment. It had begun to rain. Closing the window to keep the rain out, he walked over to the fridge, wanting to eat before he went back to sleep. He grabbed some leftover miso soup Virgo had made him a couple days ago. Using his fire chakra, he warmed it, then began to eat at the table. He could hear the rain tapping against the window. Of course it would rain on a night like this. He guessed it was going to rain all day tomorrow as well. He continued to eat, thinking about tomorrow and their mission to retrieve Tsunade. He thought about going to the old man's funeral, but didn't see the point, he had already grieved enough. He ignored the raindrops that fell into his miso, continuing to eat. He got up, putting the spare mattress underneath the bed. It was morning now, about 6 or 7 if he had to guess. Temari was still asleep but he let her rest. He considered eating breakfast but his late-night snack kept him full enough. He skipped out. He went to the bathroom and took a shower, dried off and got dressed. When he came out Virgo was there, having let himself in through the window. Doffy just nodded at him, not surprised to see him. I have a mission today, Lee. Jiraiya and I are going to find the next Hokage and cure Temari. Virgo nodded at him, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned his head and looked over to the bedroom. And Temari, are you bringing her with you? He shook his head. No, it's better that she stays in the village with you and Gaara. Make sure nothing happens to the two of them, Lee. Virgo nodded to him, turning toward the window to let himself back out. Lee, go through the door this time. Virgo looked at him, confused. But I always go through the window. Doffy chuckled at his friend. No, the Leaf Jonin do that, not you, Lee. Virgo nodded as if having a sudden epiphany. Ah, that's right. He left through the door. Doffy shook his head with a small smile on his face. Moving toward the door, he saw Temari still sleeping. He thought about waking her to tell her that he was leaving, but he trusted Virgo to accomplish that task. He walked outside. Sure enough, it was still raining. He moved quickly, heading toward the eastern village gate. He looked around the village as he went. There were several destroyed buildings and areas still being searched for anyone who was caught under some rubble. There were already people getting to work though, rebuilding the village together. He looked up, seeing the destroyed sections of the wall. Ninja were there, using earth jutsu to quickly rebuild it. He made it to the gate, right on time. Jiraiya was already there, leaning against a tree as he made his approach. Ready to go, kid? He nodded at the older man. Yes, where to first? The two walked through the gate, Jiraiya waving at the gate guards as they did. We're heading to meet some informants of mine a couple days away. I don't know Sunid's exact location other than she's somewhere in the east of the Land of Fire. Well, we better get moving then, old man. Doffy burst off the ground, taking to the trees next to the road. Hey, wait up. The two traveled for a while, the trip completely silent. It took hours, but by they had already made it to the town Jiraiya was talking about. A couple days, huh? Were you expecting us to walk the entire time? You really are getting old, aren't you? Jiraiya scowled at him as they searched for a hotel. Shut it, brat. Doffy turned toward him. I mean, we're gonna be here a few days, so let's hurry and find a place to stay, okay? Ha ha ha. The laughter was nervous, not that Doffy really cared. They reached a hotel, renting a double room for themselves and staying in the room for a bit. Alright, we're gonna be staying here for a couple days and this entire trip probably going to be a while. So, I want to teach you something. He raised an eyebrow, curious what the old man had in store for him. Jiraiya raised a hand, a ball of chakra appearing in his palm. It was an interesting technique, chakra being swirled in multiple directions inside a small orb. He could already see the potential of the technique, using it to drill through almost anything. This here is the Rasengan. It was created by your father and is one of his signature techniques. Doffy took a closer look at the spinning orb, before nodding. He could use this technique. Alright then. He raised his own hand, swirling his chakra in his hand. It was slow at first, as he tried to get an idea on how to create the technique. His chakra went faster, eventually forming an orb but not quite the same as Jiraiya's. It seemed messier, not as neat with chakra escaping the orb. He furthered his concentration, tightening the orb while sending more chakra into it. It was done. He looked at the technique, surprised at how difficult it was to create. It was a simple technique in concept, but if he hadn't had so much practice condensing and controlling large amounts of chakra to create his threads, he probably wouldn't have gotten it down so easily. There was something else. The Rasengan seemed almost incomplete, just a blank slate of chakra. It was powerful, but he doubted the fourth Hokage, who was considered a genius, would stop at creating something so simple. You really are something else, you know that, kid. He looked up, seeing Jiraiya look at him and the Rasengan he created. There was a small smile on his face, but there was sadness in his eyes as well. Doffy eyed it for a moment before brushing it off, cancelling the technique. This Rasengan, I'm going to go experiment with it for a bit, I'll be back later tonight. Jiraiya shrugged at him. Works for me, I didn't plan to show you anything else anyways. I'll see you later tonight. Doffy nodded, walking out the door and going outside of town, arriving in a small forested area. He recreated the Rasengan, eyeing it for a moment and thinking about what he could do with it. He reared his hand back, then threw the orb at a nearby tree, releasing his hold onto. It flew in midair for only a moment before dissipating. He tried again, this time pumping even more chakra into the technique before he hurled the thing. It flew farther, this time touching the tree but dispersing as soon as he did. There was no point in trying to throw it. As soon as it touched something it would immediately disperse, having nothing to keep the chakra's momentum going and its form stable. Curious, he created it once again, this time attaching a string to the orb. It was difficult, he now had to actively adjust the Rasengan's chakra to avoid and not affect the string it was attached to. He sent his chakra down the string and into the Rasengan, dropping the orb soon after. The ball hung there by the string, Doffy quickly moving to create and attach more strings to it. Using just a single string was proving to be almost impossible, the added strings helped alleviate that until, finally, the Rasengan had stabilized, now being held by his strings alone. He bounced the Rasengan up and down for a moment. It was almost weightless, making the attack even more dangerous. He began to spin the Rasengan around before launching it at the tree again. It curved in the air, impacting the tree and shredded through it before dispersing. He looked at the results. There was a neat gouge carved in the front of the tree, the Rasengan not meeting any resistance. It seemed he still didn't have the control necessary through his strings to maintain the technique, but that was fine. He could get better. He recreated the technique, grinning as he thought to himself. Well, that's step 1. Now for step 2. The rain had stopped after his father's funeral, Asuma deciding to have a walk around the village with Kurenai. It was a strange thing, walking around knowing that the old man was no longer watching over them. It was something that you never noticed because it was always there. Now, it was gone forever. He couldn't help but think about the meeting he and his father had just a few weeks ago, with Asuma thinking about how much time the two had left. Sad irony had showed its face, taking that time away forever. He thought of Naruto, the Jinchuriki and his father's pseudo-grandson. Everyone knew about the boy now. His show in the invasion, fighting off the one-tailed Jinchuriki who was in a complete transformation, had his name echo around the world. There was no doubt that Konoha would receive more business after that display. Having a genin defeat one of a village's secret weapons single-handedly was not something that happened often, if at all really. Everyone had been raving about him, all of the villagers praising him, and young academy students had begun to admire him, and this was only after a single day. Who knew what it would be like a couple weeks from now? He had even heard that there was talk of making him the next Hokage. Danzo and surprisingly Jiraiya himself turned down that idea. Jiraiya proposed Tsunade instead, everyone but Danzo, who was proposing himself of course, agreed to it, and he and Naruto left to retrieve her this morning. Now, there was even more trouble in the village, he and Kurenai spotting the suspicious individuals in the village. They signaled a nearby Chunin to alert the Jonin and began to follow them. During times like these it was more than possible for there to be spies and further invasions from other hidden villages. These two were cloaked from head to toe, wearing black cloaks with red clouds and large straw hats. One was quite large, with something like a blade wrapped in white bandages and across his back. Whoever they weren't very inconspicuous, yet they had somehow gotten past the gate guards and every other ninja in the village. They wouldn't be dropping this anytime soon. They continued to walk toward the outskirts of the village, arriving at a small road beside a river. The figures stopped, Asuma and Kurenai waited as they turned around. They could only see their eyes between the neck of their cloak and their straw hats, but that was all they needed to identify at least one of them, a pair of Sharingan looking directly at them. Asuma pulled out his trench knives, Kurenai grabbing a kunai as they both tensed at the figures. Asuma addressed them first. "What are you doing back here, Itachi Uchiha?" The larger figure began to chuckle. "Well, Itachi, it seems you still have friends in the Hidden Leaf, don't you? They only needed a glance to recognize you." The figure tore off the straw hat, revealing himself. His skin was a light blue, his eyes sharp and focused. His teeth had been sharpened to a fine point, mimicking the teeth of a shark. Asuma was aware of who this man was, and he was desperately hoping backup arrived soon. "Kisame Hoshigaki, what are the two of you doing in the Leaf Village?" They didn't answer. Itachi took his hat off as well while Kisame continued to laugh. "Oh, it looks like I'm rather famous as well. Can I kill them, Itachi? It's been a while since we last fought something and Samehada is hungry." Itachi was silent for a moment, a hand appearing from his robe and resting on one of the buttons in his robe. "Very well, but be quick about it, we need to move quickly." Kisame didn't bother replying, rushing at him while pulling the bandaged weapon from his back. The hammer-like sword came down, Asuma blocking it with his trench knives. The attack was heavy and Kisame was proving to be stronger than him. Even with only one hand, Asuma was being pushed to his knees by the man's strength. He heard Kurenai move and rush toward Itachi. Asuma tilted his blades, letting the sword fall to his side as he stepped into Kisum's guard, a wind-infused knife slashing at his face. Kisum had a shark-like grin on his face, jumping back to avoid the strike. The wind chakra touched him lightly, giving him a small scratch on his face. The grin fell for a moment while Kisum processed the damage before grinning again, rushing back to meet him. His sword swept low, swiftly turning upwards as it reached through Asuma's guard. Asuma jumped back, avoiding the upswing, but was surprised when the sword came down again, lightly being placed on his shoulder before the strength behind it increased. He could hear his shoulder creak at the sudden pressure, his knees touching the ground. He was about to move backward, but he could feel something digging through his vest and touching his skin. They felt like teeth. Instead, he moved his knives, trying desperately to lift the large object as Kisum spoke. You know, those are some sharp blades you have there. But my blade is a bit special too. Only difference is it doesn't cut, it shreds. Kisum pulled. Asuma could feel the blades behind the bandages tear at his skin and muscle beneath. He watched as the bandages unraveled, revealing a blue sword composed of hundreds of steel shark teeth. There was something else, along with his flesh, he could feel his chakra being pulled from him, losing a large majority of it. This was bad. He could barely move his arm. The only reason he still had it was probably because the bandages were still on at the time. Done already. What a shame, I was hoping to play with you a bit longer, but this will have to do. Kisum started to perform handseals, Asuma watching as he tried to get his body to move, the sudden loss of chakra exhausting him. Water style. Water bullet jutsu. Water style. Water bullet jutsu. A sphere of water came from Kisum's mouth, another coming from behind Asuma to block it. Asuma turned around, seeing Kakashi rush past him, and through the mist the techniques had formed. Looking over, he saw another Kakashi fighting Itachi. Itachi jumped onto the river, Kisum joining him a moment later. Asuma got up, joining up with Kakashi and Kurenai as they stood on the water, looking over at the two Rouge Ninja. Kakashi spoke up first. Asuma, Kurenai, are you guys alright? They nodded, ready to continue the engagement. We're fine, Kakashi, Kurenai rang out. The silver-haired ninja nodded before directing his attention to the other two. Good. Now, tell me, what is the Akatsuki doing in the Hidden Leaf Village? At his words, he could see Itachi's eyes widen slightly, surprised before he spoke. Jiraiya's spy network stretches farther than we thought, if you already have heard of us. To answer your question, we are after the Fourth's legacy. Fourth's legacy. That could mean a few things, but it was most likely Naruto, the Jinchuriki that he had created. Still, he couldn't help but wonder why they were after him. He didn't get long to ponder, Itachi continuing to speak. You have gotten skilled with that Sharingan of yours, Kakashi. I can't help but test to see how far you've come along. Kakashi spoke next, his voice loud with alarm. Asuma, Kurenai, close your eyes now. They didn't hesitate. They trusted Kakashi and they knew that it must be important for Kakashi to become so frantic. They waited for a moment, using their other senses to feel their surroundings. He heard a grunt come from Kakashi, heavy breathing, a knee dropping to the water followed. He called out to his fellow ninja. Hey, Kakashi. What's going on, are you alright? He heard his voice. Kakashi sounded suddenly tired. Why yeah, I'm fine, just keep your eyes closed. The moment you open them it's all over. They nodded before they heard him collapse. They heard Itachi speak next. Kisum, we're taking Kakashi with us, kill the other two. Right. He could hear the smile on Kisum's face as he said that. He tensed waiting for a sign of attack. Leaf Whirlwind. He knew that voice, guy had arrived. Hey, you two, open your eyes. They hesitated for a moment, trying to explain what Kakashi told them before Guy interrupted him. Don't worry, Itachi's Sharingan only works if you look into his eyes. The way to beat him is simple, just look at his feet and predict his movements from there. Asuma opened his eyes, seeing Guy now carrying an unconscious Kakashi. He looked at Itachi's feet, finding Guy's advice much harder than it sounded, and it sounded damn near impossible. Kisum, we're leaving. He felt relief at the surprising decision. The two bickered for a moment before agreeing, running off. They didn't try and follow, deciding to get Kakashi to a hospital and inform the other ninja in the village. They made their way back, Asuma deep in thought. Naruto was in danger, and he didn't know how to feel about that. He was growing paranoid of the boy, his theory that he presented to his father still fresh in his mind. His ability and skill were not natural in his eyes, slightly shuddering at the thought of what would have happened if he had graduated early. He considered confronting the boy directly but decided against it. For now, he would confer with Jiraiya when he had a chance, see what he thought about it. They made their way to the hospital, grabbing a room while Kurenai informed the other ninja. Asuma and Guy sat there, thinking about what to do next. They could send reinforcements to aid Jiraiya, but they might just end up being in the Sannin's way than an actual help. While they sat there, someone opened the door, Sasuke stepping in. Hey, where's Kakashi? He was supposed to. He stopped when he saw Kakashi unconscious, Guy quickly trying to make an excuse. Oh, well, you see, we were all sparing when Kakashi accidentally fell down some stairs and then. A Chunin burst into the room, interrupting Guy and making his excuse useless. Hey, is it true Itachi Uchiha was here and that he defeated Kakashi? What about the rumor that Itachi is chasing after Naruto who left with Jiraiya to search for the next Hokage? Never had Asuma wanted to strangle a man so desperately. He watched in shock as the oblivious Chunin sent Sasuke into a blood frenzy. Sasuke dashed out of the room, Guy and Asuma glaring at the Chunin. What did I say? Asuma ignored the idiot, looking over at Guy. So, what should we do? Sasuke can't handle those two. Guy looked thoughtful for a moment, a rare expression on the eccentric Jonin's face. I'll go myself. We'll need everyone else here to defend the village, and Jiraiya and I can handle ourselves just fine. Besides, I'm faster and can check the village gates to see which direction the two went. Asuma nodded, watching as Guy left. He sighed at the situation, moving his damaged arm slightly and wincing at the pain. Naruto was becoming someone very important. S-rank ninjas after his head, the village beginning to adore him, already being recommended as the next Hokage. He couldn't sit idly by and watch that happen, fearing that the nine-tailed fox had twisted the boy in some way. Gaara, the Sans Jinchuriki was a perfect example of what could happen, and the Nine Tails has never had a Jinchuriki as young as Naruto. He sighed, trying to come up with a solution to his problem but nothing came to mind. Temari dodged the sand, quickly sending a gust of wind at her brother, who blocked it with his sand. The two had decided to spar today, something they had never done before. Surprisingly, it had been Gaara's idea, and she was hesitant at first, but took a leap and trusted her brother. She then swiftly remembered how strong Gaara was and was struggling the entire time. His sand was able to block her wind perfectly, and she was beginning to tire after dodging the sand for so long. She looked down, seeing sand begin to crawl up her leg. She jumped, shaking the sand off and sending more wind blasts at Gaara. She couldn't break the shield, the sand quickly rising into the air and grabbing her. She was too tired to try and dodge, flinching as the sand surrounded her. She felt the sand lower slowly, reaching the ground and releasing her. She fell to the ground, panting slightly as her brother walked over. You need to work on your stamina. Temari looked up, a small pout on her face at the critique. Says the one who was just standing still for a half hour. Gaara didn't react, not surprising her as she stood back up. She was starting to get worried at the situation. Her father was dead, the sand no longer had their Kazekage. For a small and weak village like the Hidden Sand, this was a disaster. Orochimaru had made utter fools out of them, dooming their village for his own selfish purposes. It wasn't right, and now she didn't know what to do. She didn't want to leave the Leaf Village. It felt safe, Naruto and Lee seemed able to protect her from almost anything. Gaara had changed as well, he was kinder now, trying to communicate instead of making threats. She didn't know how, but Naruto had changed him, and she couldn't be happier about it. A part of her wished her father could see the change, but the other part thought that he wouldn't care. She wished Kankuro were here to see this, to see how Gaara had changed. His rejection had hurt, but she wouldn't back down. She was a Kunoichi, a warrior, and she cared about her family. Whether Kankuro believed it or not, Gaara was a part of that family. It seemed like Naruto and Lee were too. They talked about it quite a bit, referring to themselves and the pink-haired one, Sakura, as family. It didn't surprise her really. Apparently, they were orphans, if the fact they were living alone was any indication. It made sense that they would see close bonds with others as members of their own little family, something that they never had. She couldn't help but smile at the thought, wishing other people were like the two of them. She looked down at the cuts on her hands, a result of the sand moving so quickly. She thought about the poison that was running through her veins. Death was something she ran into a lot as a ninja, but it wasn't something she thought about often. This poison brought those thoughts to the forefront of her mind. She wondered if she would be happy if she died right now, knowing that she had helped Gaara and stopped his suffering. She didn't know the answer. She decided to hold on to hope. Naruto had left with Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin, to go find Tsunade, another Sannin and legendary healer. She couldn't help but think of all her new family had done for her, more than what Rasa had ever done for them. She wanted to stay here, to pay Naruto and Lee back for what they had done if nothing else. Temari. Gaara interrupted her thoughts. She looked up from her hands, eyeing her brother and motioning for him to continue. I want to go back, to the sand village. Her eyes widened, surprise and worry flooded her as she panicked. What? Why Gaara, is something wrong? Gaara smiled, actually smiled, as he shook his head. No Temari, everything is fine. Father is dead, and the sand needs a new Kazekage. Temari immediately understood. He wanted to be next in line, to take over for his father, and she figured why. She confirmed her thoughts. You feel guilty, don't you Gaara? His smile dropped, a small frown replacing it. Yes, I do. I have killed many in that village, Temari. Scared and terrified hundreds. I can't help but think that I owe them, for everything I cost them. They need a leader, someone strong and powerful to protect them. Who better than their Jinchuriki, the weapon designed to do just that? The two were quiet for a second before Gaara spoke up once again. I want you to stay here, Temari. She looked at him, quiet as she processed his words. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Gaara, I'm fine with you wanting to stay in the sand, but if you're going then I'm coming with you. Gaara simply shook his head. They know that you betrayed them, Temari. Right now, I'm considered a prisoner of war, I can return to the sand with no issues. You're a different story. Even if I became Kazekage and pardoned you, the shinobi there would never trust you. It would be better if you stayed here. Temari nodded at his words, hesitantly, still not liking the situation but accepting it nonetheless. She looked at him, smiling. Be careful, Gaara. He nodded. I will. She was proud of her brother, proud of what Naruto helped him become. They left the training ground, returning to Lee and Naruto's apartments and waited for his return. He decided to rest on their second day here, not feeling up to training his new technique at the moment. A small part of that was due to most of the forest having been destroyed, but he was honestly feeling a little lazy today. Jiraiya was out again, no doubt whoring himself out like he caught him doing last night. He was drunk, broken, surrounded by women who were obviously only interested in the rest of his money. Jiraiya was a strange individual, and Doffy didn't know what to think of him. He still remembered that day, long ago when Jiraiya had refused to take care of him. It reminded him of his former father, seeing only his own goals and interests and not caring for the consequences. That outlook and idiocy was what killed his mother and almost killed him and his brother. But, after traveling with the man for only a day, he could see his reasonings. The man was a mess. If this is what he did every day, then he was right, there was no way he could support a child. Behind that goofy grin and personality, he saw a man who lived too long and seen too much. The anger that he had for the sage had died down a bit after noticing this, almost feeling pity for the man, no that he would ever show it. The sage was trying his best, teaching him what he wanted to know and his most powerful techniques. It seemed that was all he knew, a result of 40 years in the life of a shinobi. It was surprising. Even the old Hokage settled down after a while, having a family, but Jiraiya was still here, prancing around and adventuring like he was still young. Doffy thought about it for a moment. Maybe he was wrong, maybe Jiraiya did end up having a family. After all, the man was his godfather, making him rather close with Doffy's parents. Maybe the man did have a family, and he already lost all but one of them. Still, just because they were family didn't mean he was going to be easy on the man, he was still an absolute idiot. Dropping thoughts of the Toad Sage, he thought about his newest technique. It still wasn't ready, he was having trouble handling and controlling that much chakra, and he was still trying to figure out how to layer the chakra to make the explosion as large as Poe's. His thoughts stopped, his haki sensing two extremely large auras enter town. He sat down, concentrating to keep an eye on them. They were powerful, immensely so, more than able to match Jiraiya. He wondered who they were and realized that he was going to find out soon enough. They were approaching him rather quickly. He waited, sitting on the bed and ready to move at a moment's notice. He quickly sensed Jiraiya's location, who was surrounded by several others in rather close proximity. He wished his haki could strangle the man, but it refused to do so. The two were moving through the hotel, walking up at a rather slow pace. This was good, it meant that it was possible they were friendly, although he had no idea who they might be. Friends of Jiraiya, perhaps. He assessed his options as they approached. He probably couldn't beat these two if they were enemies. Jiraiya may be an idiot, but he was a powerful one. His kick from their official first meeting had barely phased the man, and he saw how he tracked his movements when he used his shave technique. Fighting two opponents who would be able to do the same would not be easy. His best option was to fight him off as he made his way to Jiraiya. His haki should be able to protect him from most of their attacks, giving him the time and survivability needed to reach Jiraiya. The man was powerful and infamous as one of the strongest in the world. The two of them should be able to convince the other two that it wasn't worth it, at the very least. They arrived at the door, a small knock audibly announcing their arrival. If they were enemies, they were very polite ones. He walked over to the door, a serious expression on his face as his heart rate increased, preparing for a fight. He opened the door. Naruto Uzumaki, we need you to come with us. The man in front had spoken first, but Doffy wasn't paying him any attention. His full attention was aimed at the fisherman right behind him, a cruel and shark-like grin on its face. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.